We all can agree that the last few years have been rough, and as 2023 is approaching, we can all hope for a better tomorrow and that the new year would bring some harmony and happiness for all. But what if I told you that the upcoming year is not 2023, but 1726? In a world where every ideology has become a battleground of ideology and moral quandary, many people think the Earth is flat. The moon landing and elections are fake, and the government is made up of lizard people. Even time, the universal truth that is always moving forward, isn't safe. Many people believe that the Gregorian calendar is a lie, a cover-up, and a conspiracy. Welcome to Weirdly Interesting, and today, let's find out if the Dark Ages were made up. Years ago, public historian Paul B. Sturtevant was hosting a Q&A section of a public lecture on the depiction of Robin Hood in films and television. You know, the man in green tights who has a thing for robbing the rich and distributing the wealth among the peasants. Yes, the same Robin Hood who arguably could have been Great Britain's first socialist. He was asked a very interesting question. What if the story of Robin Hood is all made up? Bemused, Sturtevant didn't know how to answer the question because Robin Hood is a myth, a legend. There is no real evidence of the vigilante's existence in the Sherwood forests. But before Sturtevant could think of a polite way to dodge the question, the questioner launched into what could only be described as a rant about how the entire history of the 7th to 10th century doesn't exist. The period is also known as the Early Middle Ages, also known as the Dark Ages. Today, this fascinating theory is known as phantom time hypothesis, which was proposed by a German historian named Heribert Illig. One might question if Heribert Illig is crazy because our calendars clearly say that it is 2023, and the answer to that question is no, at least not officially. He claims that 3 leaders of Europe conspired together to change the dating system and move the calendar ahead by 297 years to 1000 AD. Interestingly, he extended his claim that he had evidence to prove it. Illig accused Pope Sylvester II, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, and Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII of conspiring together and meddling with the time calculation of the world so that Otto's reign would have begun in the millennial year of 1000 AD instead of 996 AD. According to Illig, this was done as it suited Otto's understanding of Christian millenarism, or in other words, Millennium Anno Domini sounds way cooler than 996. Even if it was true, can you blame them? Because we heard of Millennium Falcon in 1983 and we are still not over how cool that name is. Illig further accused this trio of not only committing true crimes, but also fabricating the historical events and people to back the date change. According to Illig, Charlemagne and King Alfred the Great never existed because they were just a figment of imagination that became legends with time, much like King Arthur. All in all, 297 years of history between 614 AD and 911 AD were all fictional and created for the sole purpose of making Otto a cool-sounding emperor. But if this sinister plot did happen, how were they able to pull it off? How come nobody blew the whistle on them? In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar. Prior to this, most of the Roman world and the rest of Europe were using the Julian calendar. This calendar was proposed by Julius Caesar in 48 BC. Yep, the very Roman dictator who had Queen Cleopatra as his mistress. And he also successfully destroyed Roman democracy. The reason the Julian calendar needed to be replaced was that it counted a solar year to be 365 days and exactly 6 hours. A solar year is the time it takes for Earth to revolve around the Sun. So the Julian calendar had a leap year every 4 years, in which an extra day was added. But Julius Caesar was slightly mistaken about his calendar, just like he was mistaken about his dear Marcus Brutus. The actual solar year is 365.24219 days, so a slight difference in the number of minutes and seconds from how the Julian calendar calculated time. So the calendar quickly gained a day every 128 years. Yeah, when we said quickly, we actually meant slowly, really slowly. To account for this, Pope Gregory XIII should have shifted the date by 13 days. However, yet after his calculations, he only shifted it by 10 days with the Gregorian calendar. Now think about it, and we are asking you to really use your noggin. What is more plausible? Did a pope do the math wrong? Or 300 years between the 17th century and 10th century AD that make up the early Middle Ages were fabricated for tenuous purposes? Both would account for the 3 days, but clearly the latter is more fun. Or as they say, it lets people fly off the handle. Bewilderingly, Illig wasn't the only German historian to propose that 300 years of the Middle Ages are an utter lie. In fact, during the 1990 decade, several German historians subscribed to this idea after Illig proposed it in 1991. Dr. Hans Ulrich Niemitz is another prominent name who helped in the development of this conspiracy theory. His paper in 1995 on the phantom time hypothesis suggested the same idea as Illig. His main arguments were the scarcity of archaeological evidence that can be reliably dated to the period AD 614 to 911 and perceived inadequacies of radiometric and dendrochronological methods of dating this period. Now, indeed, there were some inconsistencies in dating artifacts from that period in studies conducted in the 1970s and 1980s, but they were just a confusing minority. However, he was correct about the remarkable scarcity of tangible evidence from that period. Niemitz also pointed out that architecture was anachronistic during this period. Niemitz claimed that the lack of evidence about the evolution of architecture is a big sign of some monkey business going on in the historical records. Still, there is so much recorded history from that period. The founding of Islam and its following rise, the Viking Age, and the conflict between the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world constitute most of the European history of that age. Not to forget about King Oswald, the Battle of Heavenfield, and the Synod of Whitby, of Bede and his ecclesiastical history. But people believing in this theory blame our reliance on written records and thus dismiss it entirely. There is a very solid counter-argument that all of these historians overlooked. Let's say for one moment that they are correct and the early Middle Ages never happened in Europe. But what about the rest of the world? We already mentioned the Islamic world. There's also the Tang dynasty in China, the Cholas in southern India, and the Kanem Empire centered in the Chad Basin of Africa. 2 of these 3 kingdoms survived well into the modern period. So how come Otto III, Constantine II, and Pope Sylvester II convinced these kingdoms and many other historical non-European sovereigns of that time to fabricate their history? It's hilariously impossible. Also, there are astronomical records from the past that prove that we are indeed living in 2022, going on 2023 instead of, 1725 to 26. For example, in 59 AD, Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder recorded an eclipse in his writing. Thanks to simply how calendars work, we can dial back time and find out if an eclipse happened on that day or not. And guess what? If 300 years were fabricated, it wouldn't have worked. But if the early Middle Ages did happen and the calendar is right, we surely can place an eclipse on the exact date that Pliny said it happened. The same calculations can be applied to the Chinese observing Halley's Comet in 240 BC. Sorry, Phantom Time fans, the year is still 2022 and a pope was bad at math, just leave it at that. Hope you found this video weirdly interesting enough to like and share it. Do not forget to subscribe to check out more of our amazing content.